Namaskar, Nileshok here. In this session, we are going to look at the rationale for insertion of Adhika-masa in Indian Luni-solar calendar. Why does Indian calendar require Adhika-masa? Remember, it is a Luni-solar calendar. Now, the solar year is made up of about 365 days. Everyone knows that. Now, if we have to divide this solar year, it has been divided into about 12 months. And very likely, the reason for the division of a solar year into 12 months has to do with how many rotations the moon makes within that solar year. And moon makes about 12 rotations within one solar year. Except it doesn't exactly make those 12 rotations in those 365 days, but rather it makes them in 354 days. Now, that difference creates this gap of about 11 days between the lunar year and the solar year. Okay, every year you can say it makes a gap of 11 days, about 11 days. Keep in mind that these numbers are accurate, they are not precise. The accurate numbers are enough for our discussions. In fact, if someone feels the desire to know the precise numbers and really insist on knowing those numbers, then very likely you would be giving this lecture and not listening to it, which is to say you would have a much mature understanding of astronomy, and very likely you won't be listening to this lecture. You don't need to listen to this lecture. So this simplification of numbers, approximation, is for a reason. So a lunar year and a solar year creates a gap of about 11 days every year. Now, as this gap accumulates year over year, we can say that in about 2.7 years, it adds up to another lunar month. Remember, lunar month is about what? 30 days, 29.5 days. And every year, there is a gap of 11 days. So in 2 years, there will be a gap of 22 days. And then 2 point something, that something refers to 2.7 years. It amounts to 2.7 years. There would be a gap created equivalent to, equal to one lunar month. And therefore, on an average, this Adhika-masa, intercalary month, gets inserted about 2.8 years. Keep in mind, on an average. Okay, all right. Now, why we need to do this? Besides the fact we need to synchronize the solar year with the lunar year. But the question can be asked, why bother synchronizing it? After all, there are existing calendars. For example, if you take an Islamic calendar, which is purely lunar calendar, it does not bother synchronizing the lunar calendar with the solar calendar. And if you take Gregorian calendar, it is purely solar calendar, and it does not bother looking at the lunar calendar at all for its adjustments and timekeeping. So yes, there are calendars, and if you don't do this, it creates its own problems, which are existing problems for both Gregorian calendar, but also the Islamic calendar. But let's get back to our Indian lunisolar calendar. Now, this gap between the solar and the lunar year is adjusted by the use of Adhika-masa, we just described. On an average, it would be inserted every 2.7 years on an average. Keep that in mind. This Adhika-masa is also called Adhika-masa, Malamas, or Purushottam-masa. Okay, now those are just by convention. Now, this Adhika-masa is an intercalated month in the Hindu calendar, that is the Hindu Luni-solar calendar, that is inserted to keep the lunar calendar aligned with the months of the year. Now, this is important to understand. This is done in order to ensure that the lunar calendar is aligned with the months of the year. Now, what do we mean by that? Well, the Adhika-masa is an extra lunar month added to the solar calendar year every 3 years. We just read on an average every 2.7 years. But remember, it's on an average there, so that the lunar and the solar years are synchronized. Okay, we get that. But why? There are at least two distinct reasons. One is, once we decided that the lunar year would have 12 months, we need to stick with those names. And those names have a visual validation that needs to occur in the sky. The second aspect is that we are going to refer to the seasons, or if we are going to refer to the seasons by the lunar months, then we need to ensure that these lunar months are synchronized with the seasons, and thus, therefore, with the agriculture cycle. Now, agriculture cycle is one reason. There are many other reasons, especially in the ancient times, when this calendar and astronomy, they were used for navigational purposes too. But if we are going to use the months, which are lunar in origin, but also to understand the season, then the synchronization is a must. It's required, it's necessary. Now, if you want to know more about it, the basics of astronomy, the lunar months, the solar months, the intercalary month, nakshatra, and so on, and their practical applications, you can read all three of my books. When did the Mahabharata war happen? The historic Rama, also known as 12,209 BC, and Bhishma Nirvan. You will find amazing applications of this astronomy knowledge and how that was employed by the likes of Bhagwan Vyasadeva or Bhagwan Valmiki in taking this recurring, repetitive, like phenomenon of astronomy movements to create a very specific science, as if like creating a jigsaw puzzle, creating a crossword puzzle, to timestamp these historical events. So if you are interested, you may read those. You can procure them from Subbu Publications if you are in India. If you are outside, the best, or rather the easiest way would be to go to Amazon. And some of these books are already translated into some languages, other languages besides English. For example, in When Did the Mahabharata War Happen in Kannada, the historic Ram in Marathi as Aityasik Ram, and also the abridged version of historic Ram in Hindi as Ramakatha. What we will do next is look at the simulation itself using a neat device that is been created by my good friend Amaresh ji. we will begin with the basic astronomy setup. Earth at the center. Earth's axis inclined with respect to the path of the sun. Okay, that's path of the sun shown by this blue circle. Sun is right here. The cross that you see designates 4 cardinal points. VE refers to vernal equinox. SS refers to summer solstice. AE refers to autumnal equinox. WS refers to winter solstice. Now, remember what we said. The solar year is divided into 12 months. So these are the 12 months. Solar year in an Indian Hindu Luni-solar calendar system begins with the day of vernal equinox. And when the sun goes through 30 degrees, travels through 30 degrees as seen from the earth, one solar month is complete. When it goes through another 30 degrees, the second solar month is complete. When it goes to third set of 30 degrees, the third solar month is complete. Now, these solar months in ancient Indian times had very specific names. Okay, that's what I'm showing them right now. So those names were in use, and we do not know exactly when we lost that tradition. Just for as a quick introduction, I'm going to stop the sun when it completed one cycle. That's one solar year made up of 12 solar months. The solar year begins with the point of vernal equinox. The first month, the solar month, is the month of Madhava. Okay. The second month is the month Shukra. Now, what would help is if I also superimpose the seasons. So the first month is the second month of Vasanta season, if that helps. Okay, so let's do that. The first month of the solar year is the second month of Vasanta season, and it's called Madhava. The first month of Grishma season is Shukra. The first month of Varsha season is Nabhas. The first month of Sharad season is Isha. The second month of Sharad season is Urja. The first month of Hemanta season is Sahas. The first month of Shishira season is Tapas. The second month of Shishira season is Tapasya. The first month of Vasanta season is Madhu. And with the end of Madhu, we complete the solar year. Now let's add the moon. And let's reset them so that we start with the day of Amavasya for our simulation. So moon and sun are together as seen from the earth. And think of this as the end of Amavasya. So the end of Amavasya for the previous lunar month, whatever that is. And now we begin the new year, let's say. This won't happen every year. It will not be synchronized in this fashion. But for simulation, it really helps to look at it this way. So now notice what happens when moon goes through 12 rotations. And we are going to measure those 12 rotations of the moon, starting with a point of Amavasya, when the moon was coinciding with the sun as seen from the earth. When it comes back again into the exactly same position with respect to the sun and the earth, we will count that as a one lunar month. Amanta system or Amavasya to Amavasya. So let's do that, okay? So we will now understand what is that gap of 11 days between the lunar year and the solar year. So we are starting here with a fresh new solar year and fresh new lunar year. Okay, so let's begin. I will be periodically stopping this to show you the end of a particular lunar month. So let's begin. So when the moon comes at the position where it coincides again with the sun in such a way that it is a day of Amavasya, we will count this as one lunar month. Okay. So 1 and 2 and 3 and 4. Remember, we are going from Amavasya to Amavasya. 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, and when it completes 12, I'm going to stop it. So I bring it here and think of this as this is the Amavasya. So 12 rotations of the moon are complete. Lunar year is complete. Notice that sun has not completed the solar year yet. So let's count how many days we have to go further additional before a solar year is completed. Okay, so let's go. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. You see? So that is that gap of 11 days that we are looking at. Again, I'm going to reset this. Now, I want to explain why it is required that we insert this Adhika-masa periodically on an average about every 2.7 years. We already talked about the reasons so that the lunar months and their association with the seasons is maintained. Because we are, in the Indian calendar, we talk about which 2 months coincide with a particular season, not using the solar months, but using the lunar months. And why is that? Because change of position of the moon is very frequent every day, and using that, it's easy to keep track of time in comparison to the sun. However, the seasons are truly due to the position of the sun. See if you can understand the scenario. So the sun determines the season, but we are using the lunar calendar, the lunar day, lunar month to indicate, to communicate the season. And therefore, we need to synchronize. Now let's look at what would happen if we do not synchronize the lunar year with the solar year. I am superimposing the background reference nakshatra system, which is used to track the position of the sun, the position of the moon, and also the position of other moving celestial bodies such as our planets. But right now we'll focus only on the moon. Okay. Let me remove some of the clutter, such as the names of the solar months. They are not required. We will keep the seasons because remember, season is one of the reasons why we synchronize, so that we can discuss the seasons which are purely determined by the sun in the language of the lunar months. Okay. And that's why we need to synchronize. Now, how do we name the lunar months? This is how we do it. In the Amanta system, or even any system for that matter, we note down the position of the full moon. So this is the day of Amavasya. So the position of the full moon would be exactly opposite of the sun. So Earth would be in between the moon and the sun, and that's the position of the full moon. For example, here, right here, exactly 180-degree opposite. So I'm going to stop the moon when it reaches 180-degree opposite, like here, somewhere here, okay? So, I mean, it can be this or it can be this, okay? It doesn't matter. So that is the full moon day. Now, noting down the position of the full moon day and the background nakshatra is how in Indian lunisolar calendar, the lunar months are named. So because in this current scenario, note down, this is very much in our times. Think of it as a 2023. The second month of a Vasanta season. And if you note down the full moon position, it would appear around Nakshatra Chitra. And therefore, this month is named as Chaitra. Okay, let's go through another cycle, another full moon. Again, I'm going to stop it here. So this second month, it is the first part of Grishma season, and the corresponding lunar month based on the full moon position near Nakshatra Vishaka, this would be called Vaishak. I will stop it again at the full moon position. So here. This is the second month of Grishma season, and the full moon position is near Nakshatra Jeshta. Therefore, we call this month Jeshta. Number of you would know the names of the lunar months in the sequence. After Jeshta comes Ashad, and you can notice this is the first part of the Varsha season, lunar month of Ashad, because the full moon position is near Nakshatra Ashad. Next month would be the month of Shravan. So here, for example, or here. Okay, and that you can think of this approximately, of course, as a second part of Varsha season. After Shravan comes Bhadrapad. That's the first part of Sharad season in our times. And then comes the lunar month of Ashwin. That's the second part of Sharad season. And then comes the end of Sharad season, beginning of a Hemanta Rutu, and it is the lunar month of Kartik. Now, this is the confusion of many Mahabharata dating researchers. Recently, I created a video on the confusion, like self-inflicted confusion for themselves created by likes of Dr. Ashok Bhatnagarji or late Professor Narari Achar, or in a different context using different evidence by Sri Nityananda Mishraji, where all three of them erroneously, incorrectly, because of the faulty understanding of astronomy and even faulty interpretation, especially contextual interpretation of the references from Mahabharata text that they are using, they all reach the conclusion as if during the Mahabharata times, the lunar month of Kartik occurred at the end of Sharad season. Well, if that was true, then we would have to say that the Mahabharata is happening in our times, or it happened recently, or maybe it will happen in the near future. I'm just taking this opportunity to tell you why a correct, accurate, precise, deeper understanding of astronomy is required if we want to understand not just Mahabharata, not just Ramayana, but all our ancient Indian narratives, all ancient Indian text. Because to understand something, there are three unique, specific dimensions we need to look at, which is in the Indian tradition called Desha, Kala, and Patra. Desha as in place, but also space. Kala as in time, the absolute time, of course, but for historical incidents, the parametric time. And then the patra, as in context or as in circumstances. Okay. So continuing this, so this is the first part of Hemanta season and lunar month of Kartika. The second part of Hemanta season, and that would be lunar month of Margashirsha. This is what happens, guys. Okay, 21st December in our times is end of Hemanta Rutu, and you can pull your calendar, Drak Panchang, Nirnay Sagar, whichever Panchang you use, you will find that December tends to, the 21st December, for most part, will coincide with the lunar month of Margashirsha in our times. Okay, for this reason. Let's continue. The next month after Margashirsha, that coincides with the first part of Shishira season here, is the month of Pusha. Okay. And then if you look at the second part, sorry, I went a bit further, that's lunar month of Magha. And then if you go further, the first part of Vasanta, that occurs in our times in the lunar month of Falgun, and that completes the 12 months. Now the fun begins. It may not be apparent right away, but remember, the subject here is, why does Indian Luni-solar calendar require Adhika-masa? We will not discuss in this episode how the Adhika-masa is inserted, how they decide where to insert. We will do that in another episode. But here we want to focus on the necessity, why it must be inserted, why it is required that it is inserted, and if we don't do it, what a disaster it creates. Of course, many Hindus take on a leap of faith and they follow, and that's great. Unfortunately, many researchers don't understand this and they trivialize it. And we will see how the discussion of Adhika-masa goes. Okay, but for now, so the month is over. So what are we going to do? After Falgun, again, we have to begin with the counting of lunar months, starting with Chitra. Okay, so that's what we'll do. So this is the lunar month of Falgun, full moon. So when the next lunar Purnima comes, here, the full moon day, the full moon day is around Hasta, and that's fine. Indian sages created this flexibility. Usually the position for the full moon for a given lunar month would vary between +-1, +-2, even +-2 plus nakshatra occasionally. So that's okay. So yes, we can call this Chaitra, no issue. So let's go further. The next one, remember, we have to call it Vaishak. So we are going to call this Vaishak. Keep that in mind. Okay. If you don't remember your Indian lunar months, make a list of it and write them down. So now we are going to call this Jeshta. Okay. So far, so good. Okay. So the position of the full moon is about around Jeshta. No issues there. But look what happens as the time passes. So this is Jeshta. Next would be Ashad. So this is Ashad. We are going to call this Ashad. And the next we are going to call it Shravan. I can just bring it back just to make sure that you understand what we are doing. Looks great. The next one, we will call it Bhadrapad here. Next, we will call it Ashwin here. Start noticing some variation, some gap. So we are calling this Ashwin, and the position of the full moon is like near Uttara Bhadrapada Revati. Okay, but not that bad. Remember, Ashwin plus minus 1 nakshatra plus minus 2 nakshatra. Okay, so next one we are going to call it Kartik here. Okay, this one we are going to call Kartik. So far, so good. Next, we are going to call it Margashirsha. And next one would be Paush. And next one would be Mag. Now see, Maga nakshatra is here. And right now the full moon position is minus 2 nakshatra. Still acceptable, but we are calling this Maga. The next one we are going to call it Falgun here. Okay, Falgun. And the next one, remember the 12 months are done. So the next time we are going to call it Chaitra here. Chaitra. Now you see what's happening. The something that we are going to call it Chaitra, but the position of the full moon is shifting away from the nakshatra Chitra in this case. Okay, so let's continue this. Next one, we have to call it Vaishak, remember, because we are only using 12 months. Next is Jeshta. Next is Ashad. Next is Shravan. Next is Bhadrapad. Next is Ashwin. Next is Kartik. Next is Margashirsha. Next is Paush. Next is Magha. Next is Falgun. And remember now, next we have to call it Chaitra. Here, Chaitra. You see what's happening? Even now we may accept, okay, that Chitra plus minus 2 nakshatra, but we have to keep track of it because essentially we are going to see the full moon near Uttara Falguni as if, and we are still going to call this lunar month of Chaitra. Remember, we are only using 12 lunar months and we are not making the synchronization. We are not making use of the intercalary month or Adhika-masa to synchronize. And that's what now is going to start creating the problem. We are going to look at the full moon near Uttara Falguni and we have to still call it Chaitra. Okay, look what happens now. So next one is Vaishak. Here, Vaishak. Jeshta. Ashad. Shravan. Bhadrapad. Ashwin. Kartik. Margashirsha. Paush. Magh. Falgun. Chaitra. Okay, let's go one more round. Keep in mind, we are using 12 lunar months names, but we are not making a correction using Adhika-masa. And notice the problem we are creating for ourselves. We are going to look at the full moon after 12 lunations. Look at the position. It's near Purva Falguni, but we are still forced to call it Chitra. Okay, let's do one more round and you'll see how drastic the problem is. So we already call this Chaitra. So the next round you have to call it Vaishak. Vaishak, Jeshta, Ashad, Shravan, Bhadrapad, Ashwin, Kartik, Margashirsha, Paush, Magh, Falgun. And again, we completed 12 months. So we will call this one Chaitra. Look how ridiculous this is. The full moon position is near Nakshatra Magha. And if we do not synchronize our lunisolar calendar by using Adhika-masa, we will be calling this month Chaitra. Because remember, we are making use of only 12 lunar months. It creates many problems, but let me mention the two problems that I already mentioned. The very reason we use the lunar calendar, lunar months, is because it is a pratyaksha. We can actually look at the full moon, look at the nearby nakshatra, and decide which lunar month it is. It's just a drik pratyaksha signal, drik pratyay, pratyaksha signal for anyone. That is the benefit of using a lunar calendar, especially old days. But if we don't make this correction of Adhika-masa, and we understand why we need to make a correction, then the names of lunar months lose significance with actually what is happening in this celestial terrestrial clock versus how we are naming it. So when the full moon is near Nakshatra Magha, we should be calling that lunar month of Magh. But if we don't make this synchronization correction, then we would continue to call it Chitra and it completely loses the meaning. Because the very idea of using a lunar month is our ability to simply know the tithi, simply know the nakshatra of the moon, and immediately we can decide without reference to any calculator, any reference paper calendar, any access to internet, what is the lunar month? And we lose that ability. The second thing that happens is, remember, just 3 or 4 years ago, when we started doing this simulation, by 4 years, I mean the simulated 4 years here. Remember, lunar month of Chitra was coinciding with the second month of Vasanta season. Now, if I don't make the Adhika-masa synchronization, Adhika-masa correction, I will be forced to call this lunar month Chaitra, lunar month of Chitra. So first thing, it is not agreeing with what somebody is seeing up in the sky. The full moon is near Nakshatra Magha. So that's a big problem. And what is the second problem? Associated problem. Instead of calling this the second month of Vasanta Rutu, which was coinciding with lunar month of Chitra, now I'm still incorrectly calling this lunar month of Chitra. And which season it is coinciding with? It is coinciding with the second month of Shishira season. So in less than 4 or 5 years, I essentially created a gap of at least more than 1 month, okay, between the season. And that just defeats the whole purpose of using a calendar. We need a calendar to understand agriculture cycles, which are closely tied with the seasons. And we use the calendar, or historically, even today we use it, but historically, these calendars were used by different groups of people who, because of the travel, may not able to communicate with each other because there were no phones and no internet and no email. But if they understood the calendars, they would able to track the time which will match with each other. But if they don't know how to track a calendar, plus if they don't have a sophisticated calendar, such as the Indian Luni-solar calendar, lot more problems would happen. In fact, that is the reason the Europeans, when they started, not that long ago, by the way, guys, okay, in the last 1,000 years, when they started exploring, going away from their land, and because of the lack of good calendar or even a decent calendar, they used to get into many shipwrecks because they cannot predict the seasons properly. Okay, they cannot predict the distances properly. And in terms of communication, like the time elapsed, there would be a huge gap between what the people are assuming on the ground, on the land, versus what the people may be assuming in terms of time when they are traveling on the boats. That was not a problem for Indian navigators. And I don't mean only 1,000 years ago or 500 years ago, for thousands and thousands of years ago. In fact, we have a very impressive archaeology evidence for sophisticated Indian navigation going back to more than 20,000 years. And lo and behold, not surprisingly, our astronomy, sophisticated astronomy of Indian lunisolar calendar is older than what the archaeology evidence has been found. Okay, so I hope you understand why the insertion of Adhika-masa is required in a simple language, so that we can stay with a pratyaksha, druk pratyay, that is the word used in astronomy. What we see in the sky and the way we compute on a paper, let's say, the name of a lunar month, they should match. If we want them to match, we must make this periodic synchronization correction and bring the lunar calendar in sync with the solar calendar. The second aspect is to ensure that the lunar months that we use as convention that coincide with a specific season. And remember, seasons are purely determined by the position of the sun. We can effectively make use of the lunar months to explain, to assign, to suggest, to hint at a specific season. And in order to do that, we also need to synchronize our calendars. That's it, guys, for this part. Please post your comments. Let me know if you understood why we need to synchronize the Indian lunisolar calendar with the use of Adhika-masa. And in next session, we will discuss how in our times the Adhika-masa is inserted, how we determined when to insert Adhika-masa, which particular lunar month is to be treated as Adhika-masa, and to the best of our knowledge, based on the documented evidence, how old is this current method of the insertion of Adhika-masa. That's all for today. I will see you shortly in another episode. Namaskar.